Hi everyone, this is Elena of the Witches Box, and I'm here today with another episode of Witch Booktube. I think that it's official. I am back. So, I haven't been around. Things have changed. The schedule has been a little wild, but I have still been reading. I certainly haven't been reading as much as I would have liked. I certainly have not been reading as much as I did last year, which I'm very sad about. However, I have a stack of books for you that I'm going to start talking about on these videos. So we're back. We are back. Before I introduce these two books that we're going to talk about, these two books are from the Witches Book subscription. We sent these out, I believe, in June, and we read them throughout the month of June. We talked about them in the forum, and then we had a live Witches Book Coven gathering on Zoom at the end of the month, the way we do with each of our subscriptions at the end of each month. Both authors were there. They were fantastic. It was an amazing conversation. And I say all that because I keep getting questions about, like, what's happening? Where are you guys reading these books? Where are they coming from? What's this book subscription? We have a Witches Book subscription. There's a link to that below. Please check it out. We have two versions of that subscription, so you'll get all that information down there. We read them together. The authors, most of the time, I think that probably about 98% of the time, the authors, we're able to get to join us on a live call. So we all get together at the end of the month to talk about the books, to talk about the author. The author shares amazing information. We get to ask as many questions as we want. It's fantastic. Okay, so that is the story. That's where these two books come from. Not all of the books that I talk about on Booktube are from our book subscription, but I will always talk about the books from our book subscription here on Witches Booktube. If that wasn't confusing and you're still with me, rock on. All of those links down below. Subscribe to this channel, click the links, do all the things that you know you need to do. And now let's talk about these two books. The two books that we read for June are What Is Remembered Lives by Phoenix LaFaye and Faery by Cruz. Okay, I'm going to read to you the bios for both authors, and then I'm going to just jump into these books. They were fantastic. Cruz has studied Faery for over 20 years. He has lectured on British Faery tradition at London's metaphysical bookstore Treadwell's, and is also the author of British Fairies. Cruz also has written for Magical Times and Witches and Pagans. He lives in London, and you can visit him at www.britishfairies.wordpress.com. Phoenix LaFaye. Phoenix LaFaye is a professional tarot reader, root worker, teacher, and ritualist. She has been practicing witchcraft for 25 years, and her teachings are connected to the reclaiming tradition, Druidry, and Gardnerian Wicca. Phoenix lives in San Francisco Bay Area and is the owner of an esoteric goddess shop called Milk and Honey. And you can visit her online at www.phoenixlafaye.com. These are the two books. I love both of these books. We chose these two books because they just really went well together. One of the things that I really, really appreciated about the reading for this month is that this book is not necessarily what we're expecting. When you pick up a book on witchcraft on any topic, fairies or a goddess or god or rituals or spells, there's always a lot of application involved in the writing, right? This is how you do a spell. This is a recipe for a ritual. This is blah, 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 like all these different things. This is not that book. Cruz in this book very specifically wrote and talked about the fairies of the British Isles. And this is an important point because with both books, we talked a lot in our live gathering about those that inhabit place, right? The fae that inhabit specific geographical locations, interactions with the natural entities or the elemental energies or the spirit and entities of where I live specifically are very different than those in Britain. They're very different than those in Canada or in different geographical locations. Obviously, I don't know that the Fae really care about country lines, but do you know what I'm saying? So he very specifically focused on all of the lore and mythology and anecdotal stories and all the things that he could gather about the fairies of the British Isles. What I loved about that is that, although he does mention it, almost without mentioning it already, you read the back, you read the summary of the book, and you recognize immediately that every geographical location on this planet has a different set of entities and spirits of the land involved that have their own culture, that have their own way of interacting, that have their own needs, right? So immediately off the bat, I love that that's this assumed understanding, and then he definitely goes into it. And then from there, he does this deep dive research into all of the stories that we've gathered. He also brings in how so much of pop culture and pop culture fairy mythology has influenced how we also understand fairies and how we also expect to interact with them. He susses those things out and he separates them from then also the mythology and lore that he has collected through time. It is really a beautiful book. It is a beautiful study. It is not, I think, what most people were expecting, because we don't necessarily hear about the writer's process or the writer's belief system or his ritual system or his devotional relationship with the Fae of his land and the ones that he's connected with. We don't hear about that at all. He has just brought together an amazing amount of research and information that you get in one book. I think it is amazing, well referenced, well written. If this is something that really interests you, get this book. Okay, so there's that. Now, Phoenix LeFae's book is amazing, and it's what I would term both informative, yes, and on top of that, you get application. You get information on how to connect with deities, how to connect with the Fae, how to connect with the mighty dead, how to connect with your ancestors, right? How to connect with the entities and spirits of the land that you live on. So this gives you the how-to. I wanted to really quickly, and I kind of did this a little backwards, but I wanted to really quickly read the table of contents for both books so that you have an idea of what you're getting. For the Faery book, the table of contents is divided into about 3 sections. You get a chapter on meeting the good folk, fairy history and tradition, a fairy primer, identifying fairies, fairy favored spaces, fairy time, fairy society, and fairy culture. There's friendly contact with fairies, dangerous contact where harm is done by fairies, dangerous contact where harm is done to fairies, fairy abductions, fairy magic and fairy healing, and then fairies now in present day lore and history. Get the book. And if you subscribe, you can actually go back and watch the live video that we did for this. It was fantastic. And then the table of contents for this book. How to develop relationships with the unseen, which is something that we all want to know. We are all asking about. It's the perfect, like I would recommend, if you asked, you didn't, but I'm going to recommend it anyway. Recommend that you read this first. If you were to buy both, read this first and then go into Phoenix LeFae's book. Because here you get the how to develop relationships with the unseen. You get ritual basics, how to create ritual, why to set up ritual this way. It's very helpful. We don't talk enough about creating ritual for ourselves. Working with deity, working with deities of magic, deities of mystery, deities of revolution, working with ancestors, working with the beloved dead, the mighty dead. There's a distinction there, and we'll get into that through the Witches box at some point because we have not talked a lot about the mighty dead, but I think it's important work. All the dead, working with the Fae. So that gives you an idea. It's a beautiful book. Again, another high recommendation. We wouldn't have chosen it otherwise. It's amazing read, and it's one of those books I think that if it's work that really interests you, even if it's just working with ancestors, this book really allows and gives quite a lot of information and guidance for that. So highly recommend it. These are the 2 books. Boom. There they are. Faery by John Cruz and What Is Remembered Lives by Phoenix LeFae. Beautiful information on both books. Also be linked down below. Thank you so much for joining me. I know that it's been a minute, but I'm back. I'm reading. I have books. And we will talk again next week. If you've read these books, I'd love to hear about your experience with them. And if you are reading other things on the Fae, I would love for you to recommend those down below because I'm hunting for a couple more of those books. So there you go. Mwah! Stay safe, stay magical, and we'll talk soon. Bye.